Okay guys, I'm back yet again, putting together another video for you here tonight. It is approximately 8 o'clock on Thursday. I've just got back from an auction which went really well, which is good. It's been a bit of a miserable day here in Canberra. In fact, the start of spring in general here has been a little bit lackluster. It's been raining all day. We still haven't had a day above 18.8 degrees, which is very kind of cool even for our climate. We have the Bureau of Meteorology that's come out this week and said that we're looking down the barrel of the third La Nina in a row, and that of course for at least the east coast of Australia means wetter, cooler conditions in spring and potentially going into summer. So all that is very exciting. And I kind of, because of all this kind of cool weather, I've had a bit of trouble thinking about what I wanted to do, what the next video I wanted to put up was. The figs outside, the majority of them still haven't woken up. They're starting to swell their buds a little bit. The fig cuttings, they're still doing really well, but they haven't done anything particularly exciting since the last time we spoke. And so I started to kind of rack my brain and think, what would be an interesting video to put together? How can I fill this gap and this lull in the season where things are kind of in that waking up state and are still a little bit slow? And so I thought back to the videos and the sort of things that I like to watch and the things that I like to do. And a lot of those kind of videos I realize come down to these ranking videos. I love to watch all these videos and I love to read all of the threads where people kind of rank and place their favorite figs in orders. And I think for me, there's two reasons for that. Number one, I think it gives me a good insight into what potential varieties I might like to add in the future. And it also gives me a bit of an idea about how the varieties that I already have compare, and maybe how they lack or what they might have over some of these other varieties that people commonly comment upon. And so that's what I thought I'd do. I thought, wow, it'd be a really great idea. I'll do my own. I'll put together a top 10 figs list. Not just a top 10 in Australia, mind you. Top 10 figs in the entire world. So it's quite a grand project that I'm aiming for here. And almost as soon as I kind of made that decision and I started to actually think about it and I started thinking, how would I put this together? The problems started to appear in my mind. And the problems are basically related to subjectivity. How is it that we come up with any sort of list, whether it's figs or anything else, to say that this is the top of anything? So, for instance, for me, someone might ask me what's my favorite fig, and I might choose a fig that's a large, dark fig with a really deep interior, very rich berry, very sweet still flavor, very nice meaty chunky fig. And that might be the fig that I choose as my kind of favorite fig. You, on the other hand, might see things differently. Maybe you hate berry figs. Maybe you're the sort of person that prefers a really rich and decadent honey fig. Maybe you like those really rich sugary flavors, maybe a little bit of melon in there, and maybe that's really your jam. And so because of those things, my list of the top 10 figs in the world might be different to your top 10 figs in the world. It might not even be related to flavor either. So you might rank your figs not based upon flavor, but what actually grows in your yard or your property. Maybe you live in a country that has extremely short summers and you need a fig that has a really good quality Braber. Or maybe you live in a country that has really cold winters and every single year your figs are burnt from frost down to the ground and they have to regrow back every year. And one of the things that's most important to you is a fig that has a really early main crop. Or maybe you live in a hot, rainy climate and very humid and you need a fig that's resistant to splitting. After all, what good is it? Imagine there was out there in the world one fig to rule them all, one undisputed champion of flavor. Everybody said, this is it, this is the number one fig, but it doesn't grow where you live. Would you still rank it in your number one of favorite figs? Maybe. And so that's what I started thinking, and I started to think, how can I overcome this problem? How can I overcome the problem of individual bias, of this subjectivity that comes with such a question? And I thought about it and I thought about it and I thought, well, if I ask a single person, what's your top 10 favorite figs? That's obviously not a very good example and not a very good indication of the world's top 10 favorite figs. On the other hand, if I asked every single fig grower in the entire world, what is your favorite fig? then we would start to form a pretty clear kind of list of something that we could say is somewhat definitive, somewhat authoritative, a sort of clear list which people could look back on and say, yes, this is a very good example of what the top 10 FIGs in the world might be. So that's where I kind of started thinking. And this video is going to be all about kind of what I did next. And I did end up putting a list together. And I wanted to put in this video how I did it, how I collated a bunch of data with as many data points as possible to kind of satisfy that need for multiple inputs from many people to kind of create a list that was more than just a subjective list of my own or a small collection of individuals. And so this video is going to have multiple parts. Number one, we're going to talk about what I exactly did. We're going to talk a little bit about the methods I used, how I collected my data, how I kind of consolidated that data and analyzed it. We're going to have a look at some of the things that I included and I excluded. And then finally, we're going to start looking at a list of FIGs that I created. Now, I did have originally in mind, in my goal that I was aiming towards was a list of 10 FIGs. And as I started to put this list together, it became more and more clear to me that 10 just wasn't going to be sufficient, because there were so many very, very popular FIGs that came out in that list that didn't make the top 10. They didn't even make the top 20, in some cases not even the top 30 FIGs. And so because of that, I thought I'd expand the list out. And a couple of maybe good examples of that. There's a FIG variety called LSU Scots Black. And this is a FIG that came up in the kind of data that I collected multiple times. A lot of people brought this FIG up. And that FIG actually ranked on my list at number 45. Further down the list, another FIG variety that is very, very commonly touted as an excellent FIG, Colonel Littman's Black Cross, that actually ranked at number 50 on my list. And even further down the list, another FIG variety that people commonly say is an exceptional variety, and the majority of people out there have probably heard of, and that's the Col de Dame Noir. And the Col de Dame Noir on my list ranked at number 56. And if you can imagine a FIG that is as renowned and as popular as Col de Dame Noir ranking at 56, you can only imagine what the 30th FIG is, or the 20th FIG, or the 10th, and even the number 1 FIG. You can imagine how good those FIGs must actually be. And so I'm going to start going into what I actually did to collect this data. If that's not of any interest to you and you would rather just jump straight into the list, that's fine. I'll put some chapters in the description. You can skip from here. You can go and have a look at that list of FIGs. Today we're going to be doing the 31st to 40th FIG on those lists. But if you're a bit interested in the way that I put this together, stick around. We'll talk about that now. Now, this did take me a very long time to put together. So if you find any use, if you find this video interesting at all, please do smash all those buttons that people talk about, like it, do the comments, do the subbing, all that sort of stuff that everyone always wants. It really is quite helpful, and it's very encouraging when these things come through. So let's start with what I actually did. The goal was to create a large enough data set over a large enough period of time that we could start to form a consolidated list of FIGs that were recognized by many as a top FIG. And this grew a little bit more out of scope than I initially thought it would when I began this kind of idea in this video. So I collected data back as far as 2008. I collected 1,727 rows of data. I had contributions from over 301 people. And the way I did this was thinking, how can I start to gather this information? I could, for instance, go to a forum like Our FIGS, and I could get on my keyboard and type, what is your very top 5 FIGs in the world? And people would respond and they would put their FIGs down, and it may or may not be an accurate representation of FIGs in general. For instance, maybe the number 1 FIG on that person's list for this year was the best FIG that they had in recent memory, maybe a few months ago. Maybe it was the best FIG that they had a few years ago and they just popped into their mind now, and maybe their list would be slightly different if they did it again last year or if they did it again next year. There also probably wouldn't be too many people responding to that. But at the same time, I thought these threads are actually a really good source of information. And we have this really kind of valuable resource available to us all. It's called the internet. And this has got a lot of people, a lot of FIG enthusiasts over time have constantly being drawn to creating these threads of top figs, ranking figs, and putting them in an order that they find best. And so my idea was, what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll find as many of these threads as possible, as many threads that start talking about the best fig, your favorite fig, your top 5 figs, your top 10 figs, all those sorts of figs, and I would extract the data from those posts. I'd chuck it into a spreadsheet, and then I would start to rank each of those threads. So as I said, I had 1,700 rows of data, a little bit more than that. We had 301 distinct users that have contributed to this data that I've collected, that I've pulled out of these forum posts. We had 49 threads since 2008, between 2008 and 2022, that have contributed, which would average out to around 3.5 threads per year, with the majority of those being weighted towards the later years from, say, 2015 and beyond. We had 372 fig varieties identified, and these were varieties that every single person at some point ranked as one of their top figs. So this is not 372 varieties of junk. This is people who have said, this is my very favorite fig, or at least in my top 5 favorite figs. And so when I pulled these threads off and started pulling that data out, I set a few rules. So first of all, I said people are limited to 5 figs. So you can name 5 figs that are in your top collection, and I will score each of those figs according to the rank that you place them in. So if somebody placed a fig in the first position, I would assign them 5 points. If they put it in the second position, I would assign them 4 points, and all the way down to their 5th position, which was then assigned a single point. And in this way, a fig that was ranked 20 times, somebody voted 20 times for a fig in the 5th position, it would have a total score of 20. At the same time, you could vote a fig 4 times in the 1st position, and that would also have a score of 20. And so we kind of have 2 metrics we can go on here. We have a total score, where the highest score indicates people have more frequently voted this higher up the list. And we also have a total frequency count, where even though the fig might not rank as high on a score, maybe that fig showed up more commonly but in a lower place in that top 5 list. Now, people could vote on any single fig they wanted. It's up to you what constitutes your favorite fig. And people could vote more than once, provided it wasn't in the same year. So in the majority of cases, what that meant is you could vote in one thread and another thread, but there were actually some very long threads that spanned years. And if you voted in 2015 for a particular thread and the thread continued on into 2016, I did allow that person to put a second vote in that thread. Normally though, for the majority of threads, 1 vote of up to 5 figs, and that was it. If the person only ranked a single fig, so many of the threads were what is your very best fig, that fig was voted, given the full 5 points, and that was it. So that in a nutshell is how I started to score and collate and put all this data together. I thought it was important to allow people to vote multiple times across years, because it did 2 things. Number one, maybe you had a collection of 3 figs in the first year, and the next year you had a collection of 8 figs. You've now got a larger base of experience in which you can rank these figs. You might also have a fig that performs exceptionally well one year and not as well the second year. And what that means is that figs that are consistently good year after year are going to be consistently rated highly, where those that are perhaps good one year and not as good the next year, maybe they won't make the list at all. So these things I thought were really important. Now, of the 301 distinct people that contributed, we had 52 members who voted just once. We had 30 members who voted twice. We had 21 members voting 3 times. 123 members who voted 4 or 5 times, and 75 members who voted more than 5 times since 2008. Now, some of the members that are involved here, some forum members, are particularly keen, very enthusiastic fig collectors, and they would tend to visit multiple threads over the year. Number one, they would be around for many more years, and number two, they would have very strong opinions that they really are quite committed to putting out there. Now, these people, I don't think, sway the data in a negative way. These people tended to substitute their figs quite consistently, so they would add in and remove figs from their top 5 from year to year, but the figs that remained consistently good would often remain in the first or second position over time. A couple of small caveats around this data and something that you probably should take into consideration. And number one, I've excluded a lot of threads that rank FIGs but are too specific. For instance, there might be a thread that says, what is your favorite FIG for zone 7A? Or what is your favorite FIG for South Florida? What is your favorite FIG for Canada? All of these these rankings in these particular FIGs are straying from my overall goal of producing a generalized top list. It would probably, in most cases, skew the data towards more cold tolerant FIGs, and I just didn't want that kind of included. Having said that, I'm an English speaker, obviously, and the forums that I've been visiting are very largely North American based, and that's because a lot of the English speaking countries that would be involved in these FIGs, so we have the USA, Canada, the UK, Australia, maybe New Zealand. The majority of these places don't actually have access to a lot of varieties of FIGs. The UK, for instance, doesn't have a particularly good climate that's suited to FIG growing, and they won't be able to successfully ripen, at least not without using greenhouses and other kind of things. They won't be able to successfully ripen the majority of these FIGs. A country like Australia, where I am, until very recently, we haven't actually had all that many FIGs that are available. You could go to any given nursery and maybe have a selection of 5 or 6 FIGs at best. And I would say that the majority of those FIGs aren't going to stand up in comparison to the huge number of great FIGs that seem to be available in the USA. So this is very North American focused. It may kind of skew towards colder climates because of that. The USA and Canada are a lot colder than Australia is, for instance. But I think that's okay, because I do think that the majority of some of the best FIGs in the world probably is in North America. There's been a lot of research there. Universities have been studying FIGs since the early 1900s, from what I understand. Now, these are ranked, so there is going to be a list from 40 all the way up to 1, but it's not necessarily a ranking of flavor. It's a ranking of the best FIGs, and as I said right at the beginning, what constitutes the best FIGs is going to be different for everybody, but because we do have a fairly large sample size, I think that this will all kind of come out. If we have 2 FIGs that are both equally cold hardy and both equally disease tolerant and all those sorts of things, and one tastes better than the other, the one that tastes better is probably going to end up higher on the list, so I think that's also okay. If a member posted in a thread something like, here are my top 5 varieties in no particular order, well, I assigned you an order anyway. The FIG that you put first was the one that I scored with 5 points, and the FIG that you put last was the one that I scored with 1 point. If a member came in and was a little bit wishy-washy about the way that they were ranking their FIGs, maybe they said something like this: the number 1 FIG for me this year was Violette de Bordeaux. I also have in the ground a Celeste and a Brown Turkey and some other FIGs. The one that they actually ranked will just get assigned a point, whatever, will assign 5 points if it's in first position, but all the other FIGs would actually be totally discounted. They haven't even indicated whether they've tried them. If it's a first year FIG, they haven't given an indication whether they like the FIG at all, and so because of that, they were totally excluded. Now at the end of this, once I get to the final video, when I've done the 10 to 1, I'm going to release this data set, and you can do whatever you want with it. You can play with it, you can adjust it, you can delete it, you can add it to it, I don't care. I will say though that normally in these videos I won't actually identify people. I won't mention people by name. Now this is a little bit different. I find that with forums in particular, when you as a user go onto a forum and you put an answer there, or you put a question or a post, the point of that is for it to be seen. You want people to read what you have to say and to think about it and kind of take on board what you want. I don't think there's any expectation of privacies, especially around usernames, and so when I do release that data, there will be usernames attached to each of those data points: the user that made the vote for that particular FIG, the particular year they made it in, and the thread that it came from. I don't claim that this is going to be a totally exhaustive list. There may be some threads out there, maybe even some really common things, threads that everybody else knows about that I missed. I don't claim that there's not going to be any mistakes or spelling errors or duplicates in this. I did do my best to kind of make sure that the data is as clean as possible before I put this together, but that's not necessarily always going to be the case. Now the figs that I'm going to move on to next, which is going to be our actual rankings, our rankings from number 31 to 40, these figs in the majority of cases I've never tried, and in fact I haven't tried a single one in the first list that's coming up. So I do have a number of these figs that are in as cuttings at the moment. There have been what seems to be quite a surge in fig availability in Australia, at least in the last year or 2 or 3 years, and I haven't tried them yet. So the figs that I'm including in here, I've gone online and I've done a little bit of research, and I've tried to pull out the most common recurring characteristics of these figs. This might be different to how you see these individual figs, and that's okay. These figs, I encourage you to go out there, do your own research. If any of the figs that I've mentioned strike a bit of curiosity in you and you might be thinking about picking one up, adding it to your collection perhaps, do your own research, come to your own conclusions. This is just what I picked up in what is actually fairly short amount of time that I dedicated to each of these figs, especially in these kind of 31 to 40 spots. So that's it. That is all of the kind of preamble out of the way. I'm going to move straight onto the actual list. And if anybody, again, finds this interesting, please do all those great things and we'll move straight on. Okay guys, I am back, and you may have noticed there's been a little bit of a change of scenery. There's been a little bit of a change of clothes, and indeed we're actually at the next day since I took that last video, and the reason for that is I tried to film this video on a number of occasions yesterday and I just was not happy with the way it was turning out. Now my wife is working from home today and she's been cluttering and prattling around the house all day, and I didn't want that in my video. It's too cold to sit outside, so I thought what better place to film this next part of the video than surrounded by the fig trees in the grow tent. So without waiting any longer, let's kick our list off. And number 40 on our list, Violette des Soleils. This is also known as Bourgeois Noir, and this is a French old variety. Now in the Soliers region where this comes from, it's a very common fig, it's a popular fig, and it's one of those figs you can buy in the shops and the markets and all over the place. This fig has what is known as a protected designation of origin, which means that much like champagne, in order to call this particular fig Violette des Soleils, you have to be from the Soliers region in France. It's a dark fig with sometimes very dark to almost blue glossy skin. It has a deep red berry interior, and this scored 29 points on my list, being nominated by 8 people as in their top 5 figs. 39th spot goes to a fig that I'm not particularly familiar with, and I must admit hadn't even heard of until I put this list together, and yet doing some research it turns out to be an extremely popular fig. It's a new fig, it's called Thermalito. It's a Californian fig and was discovered by a forum member called Blue Malibu, and it seems to be a chance seedling that turned up on one of his properties. It's a reportedly extremely prolific fig, it's a tasty fig, and it's a fig that's relatively new and can be quite difficult to obtain, and yes, that doesn't even exist in Australia, at least at this point in time. This fig received 30 points and was voted on by 7 people in their top 5 figs. 38th spot goes to a fig whose name I'm going to butcher, Des Tres et Splets. It's a Spanish fig, and it's rare in that it produces 3 crops per year. It produces the initial breva, it produces the main crop, and then it produces the second main crop. It is said that this fig's breva crop is the best of the 3, being both larger in size, better in flavour, and sometimes darker in colour. The third crop is said to be the worst, being both sparse in the number of fruit and in the flavour. It comes from Montserrat Pons' collection, who was a fig researcher and collector in Spain. This has very interesting honey and sugar flavours, sometimes a very light berry flavour, and this one, if allowed to hang on the trees, apparently will develop beautiful, sweet, strong sugar flavours. This fig scored 32 points and had 9 people vote for it on my list. The 37th spot on our list goes to a fig called Petite Albique. Now this fig is sometimes said to be synonymous with other Bordeaux type figs such as Violette des Bordeaux. This is a fig that's said to have an extremely high quality breva, which would make it really good for people that can't ripen their main crop figs and need something that's going to ripen a little bit earlier. It's a medium to small size French fig, and it has strong berry flavours. It's got 33 points and had 9 people voting for it on my list. 36 spot. 36 goes to a contentious fig. This fig is a fig that comes from Canada and is called Genovese Nero. This fig is a medium to large dark fig with a jammy, syrupy interior. It is contentious because when it came out, there were multiple forum members who said that they had the only one true copy of the cuttings and the scions from this plant, and theirs was the only one that was true to type. It's very popular in flavour. It is said to be reminiscent of the Italian 258, and some people have even said it might be the same fig. As I said, there were huge ruckus and fights on the forums regarding this fig, so if you do want to go check that out, I'm sure you can go find those threads which are still up and see all the fun. This fig scored 33 points and had 12 people voting on it in their top 5 figs. Number 35. Number 35 goes to a fig called Canaglia. Canaglia was developed in the 1950s by a researcher called Ira Condit. He was looking to improve the Adriatic fig types that they had in the San Jacinto Valley in California. The problem being that these figs had an extremely large eye. Insects would enter the eye of the fruit, they'd bring with them a fungus which would then cause the fig to spoil and sour. So Ira Condit went out there and thought he would develop a new improved variety, and that's exactly what he did. Canaglia is an amalgamation of Condit and Adriatic Conaglia. It's an Adriatic hybrid. It's got sugary kind of honey melon flavors, and some people say there can be an occasional berry in there as well. Some people say that it's actually quite a bland fig, and bland enough not, it was popular enough to score 34 points on my list, with 10 people voting this fig in their top 5. Number 34. Number 34 is another fig from the collection of Montserrat Pons in Spain. It is named after its shape, which is said to be shaped like a cauldron. This fig is known as Calderona, and it's a dark-skinned fig, again with a deep red interior. This has a dedicated following on the forums, and famous figure Ross Raddy has said that he thinks that it's better than the highly regarded Black Madeira. People tend to agree with him. It has an extremely strong berry flavour. It's meant to be exceptionally good, and it's one that I'm looking forward to trying from my own collection, hopefully later this year, should it ripen. This received a total score of 34 points, and it was voted on by 8 people. 33rd spot goes to another French fig. It's called Hâtive d'Argentil. This is a fig that means early of Argentil, and this fig was actually sent to UC Davis in 1921, and from there it started a great tradition of being incorrectly named from there on in. Hâtive d'Argentil sounds a lot like native of Argentil, when it actually means early of Argentil. This is an excellent tasting fig. It's on the smaller size, it's an early crop, and it's meant to have an intense cherry flavour, according to Ross Raddy. Other people have kind of agreed with him, saying that it has intense concentrated berry flavours, and it does indeed sound like a delicious fig. It has a violet kind of dusky purple skin, a bright red interior, and this variety scored 35 points, being voted on by 11 people. In the 32nd and the second to last spot on this list for today is the first Mount Etna type fig to appear. And the Mount Etna type figs, I promise you, are going to appear later up the list. And this particular fig is an Italian fig, and it comes from a village called Cassia. It was named after a saint of that village, and it's called Saint Rita. This is another smaller fig that is an early fig and is suitable for colder climates. It is highly regarded and is said to have intense concentrated berry flavors. It's got a flavorful skin that complements the taste of the fruit, and this fig scored 36 points, being voted on by 10 people in my list. And now into our 31st spot, and we'll start this with a story. There was an old Italian man who every single day would sit under his favourite fig tree, eating figs and bread. And people would pass him by and they would say, "How are you? Are you okay?" And he would say, "This is my paradiso." And much like the old Italian gentleman, this fig, Paradiso, seems to have found a place in many people's hearts. Although many people seem to have found many figs that they've called Paradiso across the years, because there are a lot of variations and different adaptations of this plant, as it seems. There's a Paradiso JM, there's a Paradiso Bronze, a Paradiso Zero, a Paradiso Board, and who knows what else. It seems to me that it's very likely that someone will find a fig that they think is the absolute paradise to them, and then they will adopt that name for it if they're not sure what it could be. There seems to be a large range of what these figs taste like and look like, and I haven't actually been able to determine what the original Paradiso was meant to look like, except that it's most likely an Adriatic fig. It comes from the Genoa region in Italy. This fig is a berry, probably a berry type fig. It scored 37 points and had votes from 13 people. And so thus concludes our first list, guys. I hope that it was everything that you thought it would be. Are you surprised by the figs that are on that list? Did you think they should be higher, or did you think they should be lower? I'd be very interested to know what you think might be in the next 10 on the list, and even more interested to see if anybody can guess what the actual top 10 list might look like. And so guys, I'll leave that with you. Thank you for coming along. If you watched this video from the very start to the very end, it's been a long video, I know. I hope that you enjoyed it, and again, thank you, and I guess I'll just have to see you all in the next one. Catch you later.